This week we hear from the 8th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, beginning at verse 31. Jesus talks to his disciples here and to a whole bunch of other people who are maybe not yet his disciples, but are interested in what he's doing. And he tells them what it means to follow him. Mark says this: Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the chief priests and the elders and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all of this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Jesus told his disciples very clearly, very plainly, that if they were following him, if they were to follow him, put it that way, because he's placing things out there, recognizing that people have a choice of what to do, whether to follow him, whether not to follow him. And if they do, they may be getting themselves into more than they realize. Just want you to know, he's saying, I do want you to follow me, but don't think it's always going to be easy. There would be times, he said, when the risks would be enough to make you really want to grab onto whatever form of security you can. And that there would be times when security and safety would be offered to them, but at the expense of really and truly going where he had gone and walking where he had walked. You could step aside from the path if you want. And you might find yourself feeling a little bit safer. But would you still be following? And if you're not following him, well then, what are you really doing? If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up the cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life, he said, those who lose their life for my sake and the sake of the good news, the gospel, will find it. If you don't find good news, Do you find bad news? Do you find no news at all? Is it just the same old, same old? And if it is, what kind of life is it? To follow Jesus is not easy, but it is worthwhile. In fact, it's worth more than your while. He compares it to the world. What does it profit, he said, if you gain the whole world and lose your life? I like the older translation, your soul. What does it profit a man that he gain the world and lose his soul? It's King James, I know. But the idea is the same. When you're losing yourself and willing to lose yourself, and not to lose yourself for your own sake, but to lose yourself in him or for his sake, there are things that you gain as well as things that you lose and set aside. But what you gain from him and for him is far greater than anything you can ever expect. But it's a matter of faith. It's a matter of trust. And it's a matter of being ready to go outside the norms. What Jesus said he had to offer to his followers is something that's beyond price. Something that may take your life, but something that's worth far more than that. And you find life in doing it. In the most literal sense, in the sense that it probably spoke to the community of Mark, who wrote the gospel and recorded these words, and the other gospel writers. They probably heard this referring directly to the risk to life and limb that was involved in following Jesus, in being a Christian. And that was not off by any means. There were many people who gave their lives simply because of following Jesus and of openly being his follower. Some of them, we know their names, but we forget even. We push these things off into an almost mythical kind of an age and say, oh, that was back then in the days of the people who, we've even named towns after. Could be in St. Albans, Vermont, or St. Paul, Minnesota. Alban was a man named Albinus, who was killed outside what was then Londinium, London, for being a Christian in the Roman Empire. Before we pass all of these people off into a distant age and lose track of the power of what Mark is saying here, of Jesus' words that Mark is quoting, we should be aware and really consider how directly these things are true in our own day as well. We can't just push this idea of witness back into the past or continue it in our own day in some sort of attenuated way, saying, oh, well, this has to do with giving things up for Lent or denying yourself chocolate. It's not the same thing. Let me bring it up into the present age. Let me speak the name of someone who has been in the news in the past week very much. Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny was a human rights activist, an activist in the cause of democracy. And he had, a few years ago, just barely escaped Russia, having been poisoned. It's kind of one of those stories that you can't believe, you can't make up. In the old martyrologies, as we talk about them, the records of the deaths of martyrs, they died in all sorts of strange ways. Navalny was poisoned a few years ago because somebody put poison in his underpants that was absorbed through his skin. And he became so sick, they barely got him out of the country and to the safety of a hospital in Germany where it was all discovered. Although it was pretty clear what had gone on. And without having official confirmation of who was behind it, even now, I feel confident saying that for my mind, it's pretty clearly Vladimir Putin. Putin's opponents have developed a habit of being poisoned, of drinking tea with polonium in it, or using hand cream that somehow has been dosed with Novichok, a nerve agent. Others of his opponents have it's amazing how often they seem to lose their balance when they're standing near an open window a few floors up. It's just weird how that happens. So back to Navalny. Among those others, after he had time in Germany to recover, he announced that he was going back to Russia, which of course made no sense. None whatsoever. But he did it. And after he got there, he was eventually arrested and sent to prison, and nobody was surprised. And for about 10 days recently, give or take, prisoner Navalny disappeared from the radar and reappeared in another prison in Siberia. What we used to call in the good old days of the Soviet Empire, a gulag. And once he was there, it became pretty obvious that he would not be around for much longer. And sure enough, last Friday, it was announced that he had died in a Russian prison in Siberia, mysteriously. A couple days after he was seen on video, looking maybe not especially chipper, but very much alive and well. Navalny is usually referred to in the news, as I referred to him earlier, as a human rights activist. And he was. He was among the boldest. But what had pointed him in the direction of becoming such a person, and what had kept him going, even when his underpants had been poisoned, and even when he woke up in a German hospital wondering what was going on, even when he knew better than any of us what was going to happen to him. What kept him going was something beyond politics. There was an article published by the Catholic News Agency on the day that Navalny's death was announced publicly. And it included words that he had shared in February of 2021 with a group that put those words on its own website. And the group has since then disbanded. But the words have not gone away. They're still up on the web right now, although I suspect that in the original, they'll disappear pretty soon. But what he said, if you want, I'll talk to you about God and salvation. I'll turn up the volume of heartbreak to the maximum, so to speak. The fact is that I am a Christian, which usually rather sets me up as an example for constant ridicule in the Anti-Corruption Foundation, because mostly our people are atheists. And I was once quite a militant atheist myself, Navalny said, as reported by the Moscow Helsinki Group, a now defunct Russian human rights organization. But now I am a believer. And that helps me a lot in my activities because everything becomes much, much easier. I think about things less. There are fewer dilemmas in my life because there's a book in which, in general, it is more or less clearly written what action to take in any situation. It's not always easy to follow this book, of course, but I'm actually trying. And so, as I said, it's easier for me probably than for many others to engage in politics. The article says Navalny went on to quote the Bible, specifically the Beatitude passage from Christ's Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. I've always thought that this particular commandment is more or less an instruction to activity, Navalny continued. And so, while certainly not really enjoying the place where I am, I have no regrets about coming back or about what I'm doing. It's fine because I did the right thing. On the contrary, I find a real kind of satisfaction because at some difficult moment, I did as required by the instructions and did not disobey the commandment. Now, nobody in their right mind seeks martyrdom. But people of faith do not fear to offer their witness to God's love when the moment finds them. And for some, that's their whole lifestyle. To live in such a way that it pleases God, come what may. That is a beautiful thing. That's something we all should reach for. We all should try to grab onto and hold on to try to please God, to love God with all our heart and mind and soul and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we do that, that's a great gift to God and our neighbor, and it's a great gift to ourselves. If someone finds that a threat, that's on them. They don't need to. In fact, showing them that there's another way, demonstrating that there's another way. And I use demonstrating knowing that it's a loaded word. Demonstrating that there is another way. That can be an act of kindness and offer someone who's trapped in a cycle of horror, fear, murder, violence, anger, retribution, all of those things. It is a witness to them that there is another way. Not even all worldly rulers fall into that trap, though many of them do. There is a better way, and it's an open way, open to anybody, just as Jesus pointed out to the crowd. If any want to be my followers, come on, you're welcome. Now understand, you may have problems because of it, but come. We're not all Navalny. We're not all Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's faced the same choice. He was a German theologian who was teaching at Union Seminary in New York, having escaped from Germany. Not really escaped, he wasn't being chased, but he had left in the 1930s, knowing how things were tending. And he, when the time came, returned to Germany because he needed to be with his people in order to fully be with his God and with God's Son, his Savior. And in doing that, he bore witness to many that no, not all Christians in Germany had been co-opted, and that there were those who remembered that there is a better way. There have been many who have done similar things. And there are many who are not called to those things, who don't live in that kind of a situation, but nevertheless understand that it is up to all of us to offer whatever witness to the love of God in Christ in whatever presents itself in our own lives. And there are times that arise in which that takes a more public kind of a form than others. Unless good people stand up for the weak against the strong, unless people of truth speak up loudly against pervasive lies, unless Jesus' followers in those times confront the dangers of what you could call power hunger at all levels, and stop endorsing ruthlessness and violence, unless these people do these things, then they're not following Jesus where Jesus has gone and where he calls his people to follow, because follow is what we are supposed to do. To go where he has gone before us. Likewise, the world's ways will try to find some sort of entrance where they don't belong. And there are times where we fall into arrogance and we ignore our own participation in the sin of the world. There are times when we neglect the log that's in our own eye in order to criticize or even remove, if we're fortunate enough, the speck in somebody else's eye. When we do those things, then too, we're setting aside Jesus' teaching. It's not always easy to follow, even when you know where you need to go. But Jesus said it wasn't going to be easy. He made a point of saying that it would be hard, at least sometimes. But he also said he would travel the way with us. You know, shortly before he himself was arrested and convicted on trumped up charges, Jesus told his disciples this. And this is what to hang on to in whatever comes along. Jesus said to them, I've said this to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you face persecution, but take courage. I have conquered the world.